First of all, got it. Um, First of all, look, as you know, I have a long-standing relationship with President Biden from the first time he came up, the first big campaign event that he did for me, right at the Lynn YMCA back in the day. I know some of you were there, and was really the first national politician to come in and support my run for Congress, and did so in a very big way. And so we've stayed close ever since then. He's been a mentor to me, and I've been working hard to support the president's agenda. So from the American Rescue Plan, that was aimed to get shots in people's arms, kids in schools, Americans in jobs, and money in people's pockets, really getting involved in the details of that. For example, I wrote a letter about how important it was to have transit funding in these rescue plans, that translated into a lot of money for Massachusetts that will make a difference in our commutes. The $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill that was signed by President Biden, that's something that we've been thinking a lot about on the Transportation Committee. And of course, Build Back Better, which is not has passed the House, but it has not passed the Senate, as we all know. That is something that includes some very specific provisions that I got in through my seat on that committee. So that's something that we've all been working on behind the scenes. I say we all, me and my team and I, because these things take a lot of work to get done. Of course, you've heard about some of the successful legislation that we've passed into law, including the National 988 Mental Health Hotline, set to be implemented this year. The Brandon Act, which is going to make mental health support more accessible for service members. And the Welcomed Act, which is helping resettle Afghan refugees and allies as we speak. These are all pieces of legislation that took a lot of work. They're great ideas, sure, but it's amazing how difficult it is to get things passed and signed into law in this environment. You have to, in most cases, certainly in the case with all three of these, get some Republican support, get support in both the House and the Senate, work with the administration to make sure that they're on board with it. I mean, my gosh, we got National 988 bill passed under the Trump administration. That was not easy. You wouldn't believe some of the objections that came up to a bill that seems to make so much sense that everybody loves it right now. That was difficult along the way. And of course, another a bill that was actually highlighted in a news segment that you may have seen over the holidays, working with Jim Clyburn and Senator Warnock and others. I wrote a bill, got them on board, and introduced it with them, called the GI Bill Restoration Act, which seeks to right some historical wrongs by extending housing and education GI Bill benefits to certain direct descendants of Black World War II veterans who were denied them by racist VA administrators. So that's a huge win. It's not signed into law yet. That's something that we are working to gather co-sponsors for, but we already have some impressive leaders on the bill. Namely the great Mr. Clyburn and Senator Warnock, and so we're moving forward on that. There's a lot more work to do. Obviously, what's in front of us right now is the fact that we haven't passed Build Back Better that includes so many important provisions to address climate change, to continue help us getting through the pandemic, to invest in real future-focused transportation, to take care of our kids. Lots of work that still needs to be done, and we're going to continue working on it. In terms of the local politics, so far, one Republican has filed paperwork to run against me this cycle. Another is rumored to be considering a campaign. Obviously, these Republicans are interested in running because despite the convincing victory that we had in 2020, the Mass GOP still has this seat in their sights. In 2012, they came within 1 point of winning it, and they haven't forgotten that. So this is always going to be in their sights, and that means that we always have to work hard. So there we go. Let's get right into questions from that, and I'm just looking around the room here for who wants to go first. Aaron, Renee was the first person I saw, but now I don't see her, so I don't know.
Yeah, so I can, to make it a little bit easier, I can kind of moderate.
Do you want to do that, Chris?
That's here. Fine, yeah. Just 1 second. Let me change my view so that I can give myself a little pin. So I have a combo. So I have people asking questions here. I also have had people email some questions. So we'll kind of go a bit of both. So I know that Renee kind of had her hand up really quick right as we started. So I'm going to call on Renee right now.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here, Congressman. And I was wondering what your thoughts were on, it's probably, this is more of a Senate question, I guess, but what are your thoughts on the strategy of breaking off some of the pieces of the Build Back Better bill and, going after them in a more, refined way, and what pieces of that bill do you think might have a chance of passing if they did, try that strategy, such as the child tax credit or some of the environmental pieces?
Yeah. I mean, look, this might not be a very satisfying answer, but the truth of the matter is that, a lot of this is up to these two senators. And I wish it weren't. I have been an advocate for filibuster reform since long before these current issues arose, and at the moment we have to reform the filibuster to get any of these things passed. And even with the majority that we have, obviously, Manchin and Sinema really, hold the cards right now. So the simplest answer to your question is that what's reasonable to get passed is what's acceptable to Manchin and Sinema, as much as I hate to say that, and it's frustrating for all of us. So I think that, if you listen to some of the reports about what Senator Manchin in particular has, it's very hard to keep track of where Senator Sinema is, because I don't think there's going to be much logic to her rationale. But with Senator Manchin, I mean, there are things that he has made clear that he does support. There are other things that he has suggested that he doesn't. Sometimes he can be someone who is, speaking from the last conversation that he had. So it is a little bit difficult to keep track of all that. But at the end of the day, I think that there are such important things contained in Build Back Better that although I'd much prefer to pass it all, I do think that we should pass what we can. And if that means breaking it up, then that's what we'll have to do. That's not the first option. It's more of a last resort, but I'm all for it if it comes to that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Renee.
For the next question, I am going to go for a email question. So this was emailed to me from the Bedford Democrats, also in our district, and it's very much to do with climate change. The first question kind of being an overview of mentioning that your website form to submit questions offers some 50 topics to choose from when sending you an email, and was wondering if you could add climate crisis as a topic. And then kind of following up on that was more specific to locally, we have the Peabody Peaker plant that's being proposed. They're trying to have that come to fruition. And it seems like we really need to work harder to get that to not happen. And we're wondering if you could take a public stance, what your stance on the Peabody Peaker plant was.
Sure. So I'm not sure exactly which climate options we do have on the website, but I'll ask the team to look into that, and we're always happy to take updates. So if you ever have any suggestions like that, please don't hesitate to let us know. So thank you for sharing that. With regards to the Peabody Peaker plant, look, I don't know all the details of this, but one of the challenges with renewable energy is that you have to be able to deal with the fact that it's an uneven supply. And so in many ways, peaker plants of some sort, or battery storage options, or other ways to supplement renewable sources when they're not available, have to be part of the equation until we have more sustainable sources of electricity, like the fusion projects that are underway right now in the Commonwealth, which ultimately will replace wind, wind turbines, maybe not solar, but certainly wind in the future, hopefully the not too distant future. So look, I understand that this is a local issue that's very sensitive to the people of Peabody, and I'm very sensitive to that. But I'm also sensitive to the bigger picture here, which is that if we want to use more renewables, we have to have ways to deal with the times when renewable power is not there. And in some ways, these plants or things like them can be part of that solution. So I have not taken a public stance on this because I'm not fully versed in all the details of the issue. But as I learn more and as the sort of lines of the debate come forward, I'm happy to do that. But just understand that I'm always going to take a strategic look at these issues. I'm not going to just, I'm not going to take a parochial look at them. I was reading a headline in the New Yorker today about some environmental activists. Some people call them eco-terrorists, but whatever you want to call them, they're digging tunnels under High Speed 2 in the UK to try to prevent this railway from being built, which is incredibly ironic because building High Speed 2 will save incredible amounts of carbon because people will no longer fly to the north of England. And so, I don't think that these activists have done their math here when they've decided to try to stop one of the most environmentally friendly transportation projects in the world right now. So I'm not saying that that's necessarily the case with the Peabody plant, but I am saying that I always take that strategic look at what we need to do holistically to reduce our carbon footprint. And in the short term, we do need a way to deal with the unevenness of renewable power.
As a follow-up to that, I wonder what your thoughts are then on kind of Peabody itself as a lower income city and kind of more minority populated city, being then the location of the peaker plant, when we know that plants like a peaker plant affect air quality and thus kind of continue to damage an environmental justice community.
Well, I mean, again, that all depends on what the, where exactly the power is needed, what the sort of details of this are. There's a lot. One of the things about gas power plants is they do not need to be placed. There's not a lot of restrictions on where they're placed. So, in Salem, for example, we had to have a coal-powered plant on the water because in a thermal power plant like that, you need a water source. You don't need that with gas turbines. Obviously, we have a massive gas plant in Salem, not too far from where I live. But these are all issues that we have to look at as we assess whether or not these things are necessary. But I recall that shortly after I was elected, there was a call to expand natural gas service into northeastern Massachusetts, and a lot of people were opposed to this. A lot of people protested in front of my office to express their views on it. And at the end of the day, this gas pipeline was not built. A couple of years later, it turned out because people still need gas, and a lot of people actually were paying more for their gas, including in environmental justice communities, poor communities, people who just need gas to heat their houses. It turns out that we're importing gas from Russia. And not only are we buying gas from a geostrategic adversary, but where that gas is coming from in Russia is a complete environmental disaster. And so by being very parochial about stopping this pipeline in our backyard, we actually contributed quite negatively to the climate crisis when you look at it globally. And so I just really encourage all of us as people who care about the environment and care about the climate crisis to think holistically about this issue. And there's that old phrase, think globally, act locally. Yeah, but don't act locally to the detriment of the globe. And I think sometimes we forget that.
Thank you. That makes absolute sense. Since you did mention the Salem power plant, I hope that people will allow me just one further follow-up to that, since I've heard from people with better understanding of policy and kind of the inner workings of energy policy than myself, that one of the arguments against the PVD peaker plant is that they could easily purchase that power that they need from Salem footprint, but because it would be less economically beneficial for them to do so, they would rather build the PVD peaker plant. And
yeah,
I
so that
encourage you to look into that.
I think, as you all know, I'm not going to try to beat around the bush with this. I just don't know the exact answer to that. Obviously, if what you just said translates into higher electricity costs for people in Peabody and Salem, then that's got to be part of the calculation here, because as you previously mentioned, there are a lot of people who can barely afford their electrical bills as they stand right now in these communities. On the other hand, if this is just a question about electrical rates not changing, but what's more profitable for a utility company, that's a totally different story. And so those are some of the details that I need to understand.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. I'm going to now move on to Neil Dale, who had his hand up kind of second after Renee. Go for it, Neil. You're on mute too, so just be sure to unmute yourself.
Hi, Seth. My name's Neil Dale. I'm from Bedford, and I worked on your first.
Hi, Neil.
And I do have questions about. Well, first of all, I'm a heck of a lot older than you, and people have been promising fusion power ever since I was 12. And guess what? It's around a lot of corners so far. I wouldn't bet on it as any kind of near-term solution. So number one. But the main thing is, your district and Massachusetts have gotten climate change as a crisis, and they're really doing things about it, like the roadmap bill. We have a real agenda here in Massachusetts, and we're looking to you for getting funding from Congress and for you to be a leader on this, not just voting for the bills, that's great, but for really angling to get funds from the infrastructure bill. We're looking for you to do that. And I kind of feel like, well, I don't know. I'd like you to speak to how you're going to be a leader on this.
Well, there's literally nobody in the entire Congress, House or Senate, who's a bigger leader on high-speed rail, and there is no transportation system in the world that is better for the environment than high-speed rail. So there's one example of where your congressman is not just leading for the district and trying to get a little money for this or that, but really trying to lead for the entire nation and to get us into a more green and sustainable transportation system. I will make with my physics degree, putting my physics hat on, a comment on your fusion comment. I mean, look, for centuries, people talked about being able to fly, and at some point we got to the point where we're able to figure it out. If you talk to the scientists at MIT and elsewhere in terms of our progress on fusion, a lot of them will say that what used to be a scientific problem is now an engineering problem. And so we are actually much closer within striking distance to be able to do this. And that will be totally transformative. I mean, I really do
promise that. Every scientist I've heard, talking about this has been promising the same thing, Seth. I've been listening to this debate. I love the idea when I was 12. I've wanted it ever since.
And people said the same thing
I'm
about flying in
that
1900. People said the same thing about flying in 1900.
Yeah, but
what I'm telling you, having had these conversations with the physicists, is that we're actually remarkably close. I don't know if we're 20 years away or 30 years away, but I'm happy to make a bet with you tonight that 50 years from now, we are going to be tearing down wind turbines left and right because they cause more environmental harm than they do environmental good, and they're not that efficient at creating electricity. And that's math. That's science and math that we're supposed to all believe in as Democrats. And so what I do when I look at environmental policy is I look at what we can do today, but I also balance that with what we need to invest in for the future. And my personal assessment of the fusion situation, for example, is that we should be investing more public money in that science, because we're within striking distance of a carbon-free energy source that is far safer and more sustainable than what we have on the docket right now.
Seth, 30 years is too late. We've got to act now on climate. You can't just hang
here's
out on a
technological
promise.
Neil, look, I understand you may feel it's too late for you, but I'm looking at my daughters.
It's too late for you.
I'm looking at my daughters. I'm looking at what we need to do, not just
we have to be working on this now, Seth. it's not right to say, oh, we're just going to keep using
Okay,
natural gas for 30
here's what
years
we're gonna do.
based on
Neil.
a technological promise of the future. Nobody
here's
in your
what-
district, look, 70% of your district doesn't think that. Most of Massachusetts doesn't think that. Are you that out of tune with the rest of the state?
Neil, I'm just gonna let you finish and then I'm gonna answer your question. So can you just let me know if you're done?
I'm done. I asked you that question. Are you out of tune with the rest of how your state wants to handle the climate crisis?
I'm
Neil,
in
I'm
touch
gonna
with the
have that
science.
be the last question, so I'm gonna put you on mute now so I can move on to other questions, but
I'm in touch with the science, Neil. That's what matters to me. What matters to me is the science. You're talking to actually one of the only members of Congress who does, in fact, have a degree in science. And that's what I care about. And so my job to be a leader is not just to follow the polls, it's to follow the science. And it's to convince people like you that we should be following the science on this stuff. So yes, we have to be making immediate changes. If you look at my entire history in this seat, in politics, and even just in advocacy that I've done long outside of this position, I think that we are in a climate crisis and it requires immediate attention. But part of that is investing in what we need to do for the future. It's not just the things that we can change today. It's the things that we need to invest in so that our kids are set up for the future and they can live in a sustainable, carbon-free world 20, 30 years from now. You know, look, if we, you know, according, you know, if we had not made the investments in wind and solar 30 years ago, we wouldn't have the capability to implement it now. So according to your logic, you know, we shouldn't have made those investments because it wasn't ready 20 or 30 years ago. Solar technology, for example, was so unbelievably inefficient 30 years ago that in almost everywhere in the world, it made no sense. But there were some forward-thinking people 30 years ago who said, you know what, we're not where we need to be yet, but we should invest in this for the future. Because when it is ready, it's going to make a big difference. And now, if you take out fossil fuel subsidies, there are lots of parts of America, even the world, where solar energy makes tremendous sense. In fact, we have a great, Jeff Cohen and others have been leading, doing a lot of work right here locally to get people to install solar. And so there are a lot of homes right now that are sustainable because of the solar investments that we made 30 years ago. So, you know, we don't need to get into a huge debate about, we're not even talking about the physics of fusion. You're just talking about what people tell you. I would encourage you to spend some time with the physics because I think it's pretty encouraging. But as a public policy maker and someone who wants to lead the way here, I'm going to be looking at the science and making decisions based on the science, not just based on what some poll tells me people think.
thank you. I'm now going to ask Kathy Hempel. I see you have your hand raised, so go for it, Kathy.
Thanks so much. Congressman, thank you so much for being here. It's so important. I'm a member of the Marblehead Democratic Town Committee, and I'm so impressed with how much the Biden administration has accomplished so far. What I'm really worried about and would like your opinion on is what happened on January 6th a year ago, and the fact that other than the followers of the former president and others, no one's being held to account. And everything we're talking about here tonight, it will be meaningless if that tyranny comes into power again, and we have an autocracy, which is what I fear for. And what I would like, and it may not be a fair question, but what can we do at the local level to address that?
Kathy, it's a great question, and I can tell you that you know, one of the interesting things about this job is you have to cover down on an awful lot of issues, and you have to respond to an awful lot of different concerns. But I share your view that this is the most urgent issue today, because most Americans don't appreciate how close we came to losing it all on January 6th. I mean, I was a personal participant in a debate in that safe room with colleagues who said, we can't go back. It's too dangerous. We can't go back to certify the election. And I was one of the people who said, no, we need to do this. But just imagine if we hadn't. Imagine if we hadn't, and the lesson that everyone took away from that day was, no, it didn't get certified. And if you actually go through the legal implications of that, we might not even have President Biden today. That's just one example of how close we came on January 6th. If that election had been thrown to the House of Representatives, Trump would be in office again. There was a recent a piece written by some retired generals about how, if the military and our military leaders hadn't held together opposing the president, President Trump, that is,
salad.
there could have well been a civil war. And I read a piece just last week in a Canadian newspaper that essentially said, look, folks, we Canadians have got to wake up, because what's happening just to our south is so dangerous. They could have a civil war in a few years here. And as the people who share their northern border, we've got to be prepared for that. What are we doing? When Canada has to prepare for an American civil war, and I'll tell you, people might read this piece and say it was alarmist. Maybe a little bit, but I thought it was pretty reasonable. So this is incredibly, incredibly dangerous. So what can you do at the local level? Well, there aren't great answer to this, which is one of the things that's so frustrating, because a lot of this has to happen in Washington. It's why all the debates right now about the filibuster and everything else are so critically important. But we do have a lot of election deniers in our local community. Every year, I see Mayor Driscoll came on the call here. Look, we all know as people who run for office in this land that there are Trump acolytes and people like that who run against us, who come and protest what we're trying to do. It was not all that long ago that I was doing a really special dedication of the post office in Lynn, and was just getting heckled by Trumpists like John Paul Moran. And although I'm proud of the work we did to win decisively in 2020, in some ways it's a little frightening that as many people voted for him as they did, right? As did. So there are a lot of people in our families and our communities that we still need to get through to about the big lie. Because ultimately, if there are a lot of people who believe that, then the chances of something catastrophic happening nationally only increase. Luckily, we don't live in a community that is sort of being infiltrated by these local officials who are trying to run for election boards and whatnot. But don't think that can't start happening. And that is a very real issue across the country, where at the local level, Trump acolytes are laying the groundwork for overturning the next election. And I don't know that there's ever been a period in American history where that's been a very real threat, but it is now.
So your recommendation is just to work to get Democrats like yourself elected locally?
Well, so look, obviously that's important, but I do think that, the dinner table conversations matter. The conversations with your neighbors matter. The finding ways to bring people back into the fold here makes a difference. We've got to make sure that we don't get complacent with the idea that, hey, Massachusetts is safe, Massachusetts is liberal enough, we're going to be insulated from this, because that's not necessarily the case. An interesting conversation a few years ago in Lynn, where I was at a Democratic city committee meeting, and great Democrats in the city of Lynn, but there was a question at a town hall like this about a recent racially motivated incident with police down in Texas. And the sentiment in the room, not to quote individuals, but the sentiment in the room was, this is a terrible thing. Thank you for commenting on it, Seth. How lucky we are that that doesn't occur here. Well, we've learned since that racism absolutely is an issue here in our community. And I think that the same can be said about some of these other larger national issues that we like to think are only problems in Georgia, only problems in Texas. But before long, they're going to rear their ugly heads right up here, and we're going to recognize that, you know, they're under the surface. There are those sentiments here as well.
Thank you, Congressman. On that same vein, I had someone email a question that was very similar, but a little bit different about the January 6th insurrection, and just the fact that I think it was, what was the number? 147 Republicans still voted to overturn the election results after the insurrection attempt. And this person was wondering if you would make a commitment similar to the ones that were made by Auchincloss and Markey, along the lines of just pledging to not work with people who tried to plan an insurrection against our government.
Well, I made that commitment long ago. I said that, and what we do as an office is we take every option available to not work with an insurrectionist. Now, I don't stop important legislation if there is no other alternative. So, for example, we had a very difficult time finding a new co-sponsor for the Save the Right Whales Act. I wasn't going to derail that act and let the whales go extinct just because we couldn't find someone else to work with. But if I could detail to you the hours that we put in to trying to find someone else so that we didn't, pursue that important piece of legislation with someone who was an election denier, I think you'd probably say maybe you'd put too much time into it. But that's exactly the approach that we have been taking since right after the January 6th.
Thank you. Bonnie Bain.
Oh man, mine feels so fluffy right now after everything.
Hey, we need a
Change
fluffy
the
question,
subject.
Bonnie. We need something to cheer us up. I'm all for it.
All the other stuff is important too. So I wanted to thank you and the other members of our congressional delegation because you voted in favor of the Voter Choice Act at the end of December. And I've just been having trouble following where that's at right now. So ultimately, that's my question is, where is it at? What can we expect from it? But what I was excited to see was that part of this act allowed for financial support to jurisdictions that switched to ranked choice voting. That was Amendment 34. And everyone voted for that in our state, including yourself. And there's a great quote from you. I know that you supported question 2 in 2020, and your quote is, if the founding fathers had understood ranked choice voting, they would have put it in the Constitution, which is awesome because I'm also a big fan of ranked choice voting and I want to see it everywhere. But yeah, I'm just, where is that at? What's going to happen to that bill? Thank you.
I don't know exactly where that bill is at to answer your question specifically. So we will follow up with you with a more precise answer in terms of exactly where it is in the legislative pipeline. Obviously, there are literally thousands of bills, and I don't just off the top of my head know where that one is. But that's something easy for my staff in DC to figure out, and we're happy to follow up with you directly. But let me just comment briefly on some of the issues contained therein. Including ranked choice voting. I mean, look, it is one of these things where you kind of just, it's not an easy concept. It's not an easy concept to explain or to understand, but once you get it, it really does make so much more sense. And it's interesting that there's opposition to this on both sides of the aisle. It tends to be more Republican opposition, more conservative opposition, but it's not 100%. And so this is an issue where I think, advocates like yourself know we have to do a lot of education, amongst our own, with our own folks too on this issue to make sure that we can expand that. And I love the fact that that we are providing some funding through legislation to try to ease the transition for communities that that undertake this change.
Thank you so much. Excellent. Now next is Richard Frankel.
Yeah, hi, Seth.
Good to
I
see you.
noticed that Biden pledged another or gave another 300 million towards Afghan relief, humanitarian relief, and I just want to encourage more of that because we're sort of morally responsible for a large part of a really major humanitarian disaster that's happening in Afghanistan at this point.
It's the worst humanitarian disaster in the world at the moment.
Exactly. I just wanted to, apropos of winning the next election, I wanted to follow up a little bit on what Renee said. You know, the polls show that Democrats, independents, and Republicans all favor allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that if one was to separate something out from the omnibus bill, that one might be a good one because, you know, listen, if some Republicans jump on, then we get the credit for having proposed it, which is a winning thing in an election. And if they don't, that gives you a stick to beat them over the heads with. And then the next thing I would try after that is universal pre-K, which I think is fairly popular and is another good one. So I think we need to get some stuff done, or at least try to get it done in such a way that we can make, you know, the omnibus bill is too big. Nobody knows what's in it, but these are very clear things you could campaign on. And I'd just like to see that. And I just thought I'd ask your opinion on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think those are great suggestions. I mean, they happen to align well with my views on these issues. You know, quick history lesson, I ran for president once, probably most of you probably forget that, but one of the things I talked about a lot on the campaign trail was the fact that as I get my healthcare through the VA and the VA can negotiate prescription drug prices, we have a much better prescription system. Yep. And it's actually pretty remarkable how well it works and the reasonable prices that we're able to pay. I mean, this is something that the VA actually does better than the rest of the healthcare system. And there's no reason why Medicare shouldn't be doing it as well. So that's absolutely true. And then universal pre-K, I mean, look, by many measures, there's literally no better investment we can make as a country because universal pre-K has amazing returns, not just because it's a good thing for kids, but it literally has amazing returns for the US taxpayer. I mean, it literally reduces prison headcount 30 years down the road. That's one of these investments that we should be making now, not just because of the fact that it will help people by having a schooling option for folks who need to go to work, but more importantly, because of what it means for America 30 years from now. And it's long overdue. I mean, at the local level, obviously I've been someone who's been quite outspoken about the fact that we should be doing this in Massachusetts, even if we're not doing it nationally. And even though we're the #1 state in terms of education, we're still not there yet in terms of universal pre-K.
Thanks.
Shay.
Yes.
Hi Shay, I can't see you, but
Oh, I put my camera
there you
on.
are.
Good
are
to
you?
see you, Congressman. I'm good, thank you. Hope the growing children and your lovely wife are doing okay.
They're doing well. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. And I want to tell you, I did not know you were a scientist, which is awesome to hear.
Well,
and
I'm not a scientist. I think if I were a scientist, I would have a different career, but I at least studied it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And also, I did not forget that you won for president. And number two, as someone who is from a poor country and with some massive history, Haiti, and we just remember the 10-year anniversary, 11-year anniversary of the earthquake that happened in 2010. And I have to say, as Kathy just mentioned, my heart still broke over January 6th, because when that happened, you know, I cried. And the reason, people like us who didn't have civil rights, human rights, and a voice in our country, who died even just for going and speak in the radio, to see that happen, the United States is the place that we look toward for freedom, for justice, And to see that happen, my heart broke, and I cried. And I went on Facebook and I wrote things. And like Kathy and so many others, I'd like to see. I mean, the thing that I do not get, the former president went and asked people to do that. And we all going, Congress is going around and look toward other people. They should go straight to him. It doesn't make any sense to me. He was the one that told them to do that. And I think they should go to the president and ask him, and then ask him that this is against the law and this is what should happen. I'm not really sure why we go around, but again, I don't know the law. And there's my question, sir. It's when we met with the Haitian families, you did mention about mental health and about doing a forum. So we're waiting very impatiently. And also we know that in the time that we are now for the past 18 plus months, that would beneficiate the entire community and not even our community, you know, Haitians and the North Shore, but it will go beyond that. And number two, I need to put that, right now, I heard the news on Haiti and people are crying and you know, all the political unrest, the economic and all of that, they want to see justice done to Jovenel, the former president. Is what I really would love to see, it's having a team from different countries on civil rights and human rights as lawyers and all of that come in, and Haitians also, and see that investigation going on to really lead to justice. And that's a lot of questions, that's two. And the last one, I would say, France owe us a big deal because they occupied us. When we chase them, what they say, they ask us to pay, to pay an amount. And that was about over 150 billion that was reduced. But Haiti took 150 years to repay for it. There we are. They enslave us, we chase them, and they make us to pay for it. We spend 150 years paying for it. And that was 80% of our annual growth. So they basically put us flat. Would you join us, sir? You don't have to answer that now. We would love to be a voice in asking friends, you know, to pay that debt that they owe Haiti. Because that was, I heard just Richard saying about a humanitarian disaster regarding Pakistan or Afghanistan. And this is also a crime against humanity that was done against Haiti regarding slavery. Yes. The first
Jay,
Black independent nations.
Jay,
yes, go ahead, sir.
You're a tremendous advocate, and I always get an education when I listen to you. So we will absolutely entertain this initiative with France, and my team will get with you to learn more about it and see if we can be supportive. On the mental health forum in Lynn, absolutely, I did make that promise. You're absolutely right to hold me to it. I held a small mental health discussion in Lynn a couple months ago, small because of COVID and the restrictions that we all know, but I absolutely will fulfill that commitment. It has not gone away. It's a promise that I look forward to keeping and an event that I look forward to holding. So these are really important discussions now more than ever, and I want to make sure we do that for the Haitian community. As I was scrolling around here, I noticed, and I apologize for not seeing this earlier, but it's multiple Zoom screens here, that Representative Paul Tucker and Senator Joan Lovely are here as well. Thank you both. You're so kind to join. I know I'm sure you have better things to do, but it's wonderful to have you here. Representative Tucker, of course, just recently announced his candidacy for district attorney. So congratulations, Paul, on jumping into that race for a critical position for the community and the Commonwealth. And both Senator Lovely and Representative Tucker are incredible partners with my office. There's just so much that we do in terms of constituent services work that we wouldn't be able to do without them and their teams. So Paul and Joan, thank you so much. And look, the same applies to you, Kim. You're on a different screen. I'm not sure if you're still here or not, but there are so many local requests that come in. And, as some of you know, we won an award last year for the best constituent services in the entire nation. But we really should be sharing that award with our local partners, because we wouldn't be able to do it without the likes of Joan and Paul and Kim. So thank you all so much. And I apologize if I'm missing any other elected officials who are on here, and I just don't see them. Matt is here, so I'm sure he can text me if I missed anyone. But thank you all very much for that. Shay, I want to just make one last comment on what you said. As we go through the latest wave of this pandemic, we increasingly recognize that we are in a very, very global community, and we might really be focused on making sure that our kids get vaccinated, or that our parents get a booster, or whatever else it is. But if we are not ensuring, as the United States of America, that we get vaccines to places like the heart of Africa, to Haiti, to South America, to places in Asia that only have access to the Chinese vaccines that don't work, that lack of charity is going to come back and hurt us. There is a reason why these new variants are coming from under-vaccinated parts of the world. That's just what the science says will happen. We're lucky that the Omicron variant, although it's incredibly transmissible, the evidence to date shows that it's not quite as harmful. We don't know if that's going to be the case for the next variant that comes. And until we get a larger percentage of the world vaccinated, we're still going to be living with this threat. I think you can make a very close analogy with that to democracy. And for the better part of the last 100 years, in some ways the last 200 years plus, the world has looked to America for an example of democracy. And we have been keen to export democracy to other parts of the world. We have some very direct competition. China is trying to export authoritarianism to the rest of the world. That's what they're doing. They do that with their technology, with their infrastructure investments, with their political investments in maneuvering. And so this is a battle of ideologies that's unfolding right now in the globe. And if America cannot be an authoritative example of democracy because we can't even do it ourselves, that's going to have huge implications for the rest of the world, and ultimately for us and for our kids. That's why this January 6th stuff is so important. And it does matter what example we're setting for the rest of the world. And it does matter whether we are a positive or negative influence for countries struggling to have democracy as close to home as Haiti, or as far-flung as Cambodia, Thailand, and Vietnam, to mention 3 countries that I visited just before the pandemic that are very much on the knife's edge of going with us or going with authoritarianism. So lots of work to do, and it all in many ways comes back to the fight for democracy right here at home.
Thank you.
Let's see. Next, I see Manny Cruz.
Hi, Manny.
Hi there, Congressman. Good to be with you. For folks that don't know me, Manny Cruz, Vice Chair of the Salem School Committee. And Congressman, I'm here today large in part as a Democrat because I want to thank you for the support that you gave us early on through the Early College Coalition in the BBB bill with respect to free community college and some of the resources for underrepresented students, recognizing that since our coalition sent a letter back in the fall, that things have kind of shifted with respect to where the administration is, where the Senate is on the Build Back Better bill. But one of the things that I wanted to flag for you is that I think that with respect to college access and completion, we're still seeing amongst Black and Latinx students that they're not returning to college because of the cost, because of the student debt crisis. And one of the concerns that I have is that the federal government at this point still hasn't taken a look at early college as an opportunity for underrepresented students to be able to complete college. And so one of the things that I would love to see and to have continued conversations about, and I'm curious about what your thoughts are where are the opportunities for us to think about how we scale up programs that are designed to support students that come from underserved communities, first gen communities, as well as they try to navigate the process. Because I can tell you, as a board member for Leap for Education, as an alumni, I wouldn't have a Northeastern degree if I didn't have the supports built along the way as I was trying to pursue my degree and my pathway into public service. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on what we're seeing with declining enrollment and where you think there might be some opportunities to invest a little bit more in programs like the early college program.
Well, Manny, first of all, thank you for all your advocacy. My gosh, I sometimes people, come to me and say, gosh, it's a really tough time to be in Congress right now. And there's a lot of truth to that. But I think it's the most difficult place in politics anywhere in America right now is on school committees. And so, thank you for your public service. I see Kim nodding her head. It is really, really tough, and we're lucky to have you. So thank you for all your work, your advocacy, and your leadership, and, and just whole, hanging in there. Look, I completely agree with what you said, and there's no question that remember that like brief moment at the beginning of the pandemic when we said, you know what, this is going to hit everybody, the rich, the poor, nobody has a cure, nobody has a vaccine. So this is going to be a great equalizer. Well, the pandemic has not been a great equalizer. It has served to dramatically exacerbate the massive inequalities that we all know. And as the pandemic has made it difficult for a lot of different people to continue with their education in different ways, it's the underserved, it's the poor, it's communities of color that have suffered the most. And we have to address that. We are a country that's founded on the basic premise of equal opportunity. And right now, we do not have equal opportunity to pursue education and to simply stay in school. So I'm completely with you in principle on all of these things. Obviously, a great wrench thrown in the mix here by the current status of Build Back Better. But understand that no one here is giving up. All right, we're not giving up on any of this federal legislation. We're going to work hard to get it done in Washington, and then have a say over how that money is spent locally. We've had some long conversations as a Democratic delegation to Congress from Massachusetts with our Republican governor, and sat down with him and had some very productive meetings, I will say, where we've made it clear that we brought you a lot of money. We're going to have a say in how it's spent, and that conversation needs to continue in all aspects here. But obviously, the central focus at the moment is finding a way to resuscitate Build Back Better, to make sure we can get elements of it passed. And the education elements are huge priorities for me, so I share your views there. There's a lot of good data on why these investments in early college, community college have great returns. And again, these are places where, even if you're someone who's listening in and says, well, I don't have any family members going to community college, trust me, it is good for our entire country. It's good for our entire community if we get more folks to go to community college. And so we need to continue doing that. So bottom line, Manny, is, don't ever hesitate to, if you're not directly in touch with my education team in DC, we'll make that happen. And so you can share some specific views on this, but we're completely aligned on what we're trying to do.
Thank you, Congressman. We do have some recommendations around some amendments that you might consider. So I'll be sure to make
Perfect.
that connection and send those over.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, May. Let's see. So we're at about 3 minutes to 7. Congressman, it looks like we have 3 raised hands, so 3 more people with questions, and then I have 1 more internet question. Are you okay with kind of blowing through these last 4 questions and then we're good to go. I don't want to take too much from your time. So
No, absolutely. So the issue is not that you're taking my time, but you're taking my daughter's time. So that's why we have to be respectful of the end time. But I absolutely want to get to these questions, especially because my middle school classmate, Aaron, is asking one of them. So why don't we have everybody say their questions, and then I will do my best to answer them quickly.
awesome. So the first one from the internet is just a simple one. The Senator Ossoff proposed a bill to ban Congress members from trading individual stocks as well as their spouses. Was wondering your opinion on that and if you would come out in support of that. And then I will call on Doreen Wade to ask her question. And you are muted, Doreen.
Hi.
Hey, Doreen, great to see
I
you.
have always good to see you. I have one quick question. We talk a lot about inequities. One inequity that we have missed out on clearly is the return of redlining. How do it, even in your own community, how do you think you can fix that? And what could you do to work with Salem United to make sure that this does not continue?
Great.
Next question is from Aaron Noonan. I'll let you unmute.
Hi, good evening. Hi, Seth.
And congratulations
How are
on
you?
your not too recent, but sort of recent election.
Oh, thank you. I love that you just set a boundary for your family because nobody needs politicians that are burnt out. And it's so important. So I was going to ask you, I apologize, I joined on late a little bit, and I knew that you had spoke at the top about the Build Back Better Act.
Yeah.
And I guess I think you're still on the House Budget Committee. Is that correct?
Well, so my seat on the I was the vice chair of the House Budget Committee, and basically got demoted to the very bottom of the dais because it's a committee that sort of has a rotation schedule.
No
So I'm not a very
explanation
influential
necessary.
member of the House Budget Committee, but yes.
Well, so I guess I was just asking for your just insight on, is there some type, I'd like to hear how that process is going, and like, is there some dual track planning that's going on for bulking up expenditures in certain areas in the event that the Build Back Better Act doesn't get out of the Senate? Are we, planning kind of duly for it being successful, but also if not, in the budget process, are there certain areas that, we're kind of preparing and with that in mind for Plan B?
Sure. Okay.
Last question, Susan Petoskey, obviously not least, but thank you for joining us.
Hi, Susan.
I want to just add on to the discussion that Kathy Hempel was having in terms of maintaining our democracy. And today it finally was stated on the news that the 2 bills, voting rights bills, neither of them deal with voter nullification in terms of who's counting the vote. And I had thought, I knew that had been brought up when they started to play around with state voting rights. I was under the impression that one of the bills had been amended, but neither bill is dealing with that, is what Chuck Todd said today on the news.
Yeah.
And that I find to be a huge error. And the other thing is, especially given your bipartisan connections in the House, why no one has on voting rights and democracy talked to any of the more independent Republicans so that Biden, and again, this I got off the news, but Biden could reach out to the president, could reach out to his former
Susan, I've got, let me just jump in because I
No,
completely
I'll stop
understand and I
there.
agree with
I'll
you. Yeah,
stop there.
that's
It-
fantastic.
it's
So,
my
so look,
concern
let me turn things around here and go in reverse order. So Susan, to address you first, look, I think the bottom line with these bills is we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I don't think there's anyone in Washington, at least on the Democratic side of the aisle, who thinks that these bills are going to solve every problem, but they're incredibly important steps in the right direction. And it is very frustrating that we can't get even independent Republicans to be more supportive of them. But I think at the end of the day, there's still hope out there, at least for some folks in the Senate. That's certainly what, like, I don't want to give Joe Manchin any credit, but that is what he has been trying to do with some of the changes to the initial drafts of this voting rights legislation. That I mean, I was asked about this on Morning Joe once, kind of out of the blue. I was not prepared for it, to be perfectly honest. And because it had just been, it was like, breaking news. What do I think of Joe Manchin's changes? My immediate reaction was, I don't think that we should compromise on this. And then I learned that Stacey Abrams supports it, right? And Stacey Abrams supports it basically because it's not perfect, but it can move the ball forward. And if there's any chance of doing it in a bipartisan way, it's much more likely to stick, much more likely to last, and not be undone by the next Republican House or Senate. So I think that's where we need to go. Aaron, look, on Build Back Better, absolutely. This was a big shock over the holidays that Manchin came out and really blew this whole thing up. But there are multiple tracks that we're trying to work here. One of the things that we are trying to do just from a budget perspective is pass appropriations bills, because if you pass appropriations bills as opposed to putting us into a position of just having to do another continuing resolution, then you can actually change how the money is spent and how it's allocated. So that's why it's so important. I've been having a long conversation with the chair of the Appropriations Committee, Rosa DeLaurel from Connecticut, about this just before Christmas, about how we've got to get these appropriations bills across the finish line, because then we can actually not just literally continue what we're already doing, but make changes to the funding streams. And that's fundamentally what we're trying to do. But it's not, it's not easy. I mean, we made really good headway last year. And yet the prospects of, for sure getting these appropriations bills done are still a bit up in the air. And then finally to you, Doreen, since I think you got to go first, look, I'm totally with you. And I love working with Salem United however we can. I need to just be totally transparent here. I need to learn more about exactly how this redlining is occurring, because we learned over the past couple of years that there is a lot more racism, racist behavior, et cetera, going on in our community than anyone really thought or appreciated was happening, including things that we thought we got rid of a long time ago. And a lot of people believe that redlining is a thing of the past. It's not completely a thing of the past. If it's happening in our community, I want to know about it. I want to understand it, and I want to be a partner with you in fixing it. So make that commitment to you tonight without question. All right, so I do have to go have dinner with the ladies, and I appreciate all of you so much, not just for your time this evening, but for your continual advocacy, for your tough questions, for your work with my team, Matt and everybody else, for being engaged. At the end of the day, the most important thing in a democracy is that people are actually engaged. And when democracy is on the line, it's more important than ever. So thank you all so much for what you do. My job is to work for all of you. I am your public servant in Washington. And so if you ever think that I could be doing something differently, if I could be doing something better, if there are concerns that we're not being responsive enough to as an office, please let us know. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm here this evening. And that's why I've enjoyed the discussion and the debate. I always love a good debate as well. We're not always going to agree on everything, but by having that healthy debate, as we have this evening, we can move the ball forward for everybody. And ultimately, that's what we're here to do. So thank you all so much for your public service, and let us know what I can ever do for you. All the best, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you, Seth. Thanks for joining us so much. We did have one last, there was the question about the John Ossoff's bill about stocks. and stock
Oh,
trading?
sorry. Yes, no, I agree with that. I don't trade individual stocks. I think that's probably what we need to do. Nancy Pelosi thinks that members of Congress should be able to trade individual stocks. You know, I've not talked with her personally about this to understand her argument. But certainly my instinct on this is that it would be far better system if members of Congress, House or Senate, were not trading in individual stocks. And that's that certainly makes sense to me.
Thank you so much.
All right, everybody,
Really
have a good night.
appreciate it.
Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.